Welcome. I am Brian the writer. Tonight I'm going to do something a little bit different than I've done in the past. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to read you a chapter out of one of my books. The one I'm electing to read to you is Crimson Tassels. It's actually my last book that I released, and it takes place in a farm in Illinois. What I'm going to do is post it to YouTube and Patreon as well. For those of you who have been lurking around my page and waiting for something different to come out, that's what I'm doing. And please give me your thoughts and comments, and I'll make sure to post the links as to where you can buy the books. So, without further ado, Chapter 1 of Crimson Tassels. Life and Death at the Anderson Farm. May 5th, 1984. Donald Anderson stood in the back of his barn, scratching his gray whiskery chin, which hid deep wrinkles. Every one of those whiskers were earned honestly through a life of a man dedicated to living and working on his farm. A hard but rewarding life, his soda bottle-thick glasses, a few years out of date, framed his big, deep brown, expressive eyes perfectly. Eyes which spent more than their fair share of time lately framed by a wrinkled brow born of the worry of an uncertain future. Today his eyes focused on the perennial task at hand, honing a well-worn axe blade to as close to a razor's edge as it could get. With every pass of the metal against the honing stone, experience taught him, microscopic shavings of metal peeled away from the axe head, bringing it closer to the perfect edge. "Let me know when you're ready, Matthew," Donald said, continuing his labors. The task of sharpening the blade was boring in comparison to other tasks at the Anderson farm, but it carried its own therapeutic charms. "Thanks, Dad. I will. Hopefully she turns over this time." While Donnie Anderson had a talent for farming, Matthew Anderson, his oldest son, had a knack for keeping things running. Since he could turn a wrench, the boy could make just about any mechanical device run as well as possible. "If anyone can fix that old truck, I'm sure you can." Donald looked out at one of the fields through a small hole in the side of the barn. He thought back to better times when farming seemed to be the way to go. Even with the advent of new technologies, the annual profits after paying for salaries for seasonal help, insurance, fertilizer, and equipment became less and less. Soon they were forced to take out a mortgage on the property to give themselves some breathing room until the crop prices recovered. After a while, the mortgage payments became unmanageable. Donald wondered, not for the first time, if putting the corn in this season had even been worth it. But he had farmed this land his whole life and would farm it until his death, or maybe until the bank claimed everything he'd ever owned. "Okay, Dad. Can you try and turn it over?" "Sure, son." Donald moved to the rusty old Chevy. "Now?" "Yep, give it a shot." The Chevy turned over a few times, chugging along like a smoker who had one too many cigarettes. Matthew motioned for him to stop, waving his hand in frustration. Wiping the sweat from his brow, he shook his head at the uncooperative engine. Then, with a wide-eyed moment of recognition, he picked up a ratchet from the small table next to the truck and leaned into the engine compartment to make a few more adjustments. Donald went back to his workbench. It was a good axe, and he remembered his own father, who worked this land before him, sharpening the same blade every spring. The blade, almost as sharp as it could be, took on a shiny edge. He picked up a piece of sandpaper to make a few more passes to get it exactly right. It was a labor of love. It was the bank's fault. They sent over a man to talk with Donald and his wife, Marilyn, about the farm. She'd made them all coffee, and they all sat together in the living room. The fancy man from the bank wore a two-piece suit looking too large for him. He couldn't be much older than Matthew. Donald wondered whether you could really call someone a man if they didn't look like they could even shave yet. The numbers were all there, and Donald knew it all made sense. He knew in his heart there was no way to save the farm that had been in his family for the last 150 years. The last line of the paperwork became obscured by a large red stamp across the final figures that simply read "Default" in large red letters. The discussion wasn't lost on his wife either. They'd been married for 30 years, and she knew the finances better than anyone. She understood what this man, with the comically large suit and fancy job title, was telling them. Their home wasn't going to be their home much longer. It was only a matter of the final pennies being drained from their accounts and the eviction paperwork to be delivered by the sheriff's deputy. He ran the blade of the axe over the stone again. Donald's father used to say the key to a good sharp blade was to make sure the stone stayed wet. If it got dry, you were never going to get a perfect edge. His father was wise. That advice had never failed. Among other life lessons, his father taught him how to fix the old tractor, which still sat in the corner of the barn. It ran like a champ after all these years. Dad always said, "Take care of it, and it will last forever." Donald even had the boys slap a new coat of John Deere green 2 seasons ago, and it still shone brilliantly. He wondered how many years that thing would last. It would certainly outlast him. "How about now, Dad?" "Okay, son, let's give her a shot." He walked back to the truck and turned the keys in the ignition. It turned over a little more evenly this time and sounded like it would catch, but sputtered out again. "Okay, I think one more adjustment and it will be good to go," Matthew said. Matthew was the oldest. His wife had a couple of miscarriages until they hit the jackpot with this boy. He was tall, strong, and smart, always a good head on his shoulders and a good heart in his chest. Donald wanted nothing more than to hand the farm down to his sons. It was their heritage. For the last 2 years, Matthew had been dating Lauren, a local girl. She was a pretty thing. As fond as they were of each other, it would never work out in the long haul. Matthew was recently accepted into the pre-engineering program at the university, and she was planning to go to college on the West Coast. Donald's preference would have been for Matthew to just stay at the farm, working it alongside him, but kept these thoughts to himself. The idea of losing his children to the world beyond brought a tear to his eye. A world filled with cities, mortgages, and young non-shaving man-children who wanted nothing more than to destroy the dreams of honest men. But then again, he'd managed to find a way to keep them all together. The axe tip took on a brilliant sheen as the fluorescent lights of the barn glinted off the honed steel blade. The flash of light looked vaguely blue in the buzz from the overhead lights from the barn. The evening, now slipping into night, requiring more light than the few fluorescent lights delivered. They'd need to stop work for the day. "Okay, Dad, this time for sure," Matthew said, wiping grease from his hands. "Matthew, I want to tell you something," Donald said, looking away from his son. "No matter what happens, I want you to know how proud I am of you. You're a good boy. No matter what happens, this isn't your fault. It's just the way it is." Donald looked approvingly at the axe blade and put it down, leaning the handle up against the side of the truck. "Dad," Matthew choked back a tear, "look, I know you're worried about the farm, but things are bad for everyone. Tad Johnson said that they were also going to lose their farm. It's just the way things are right now. Something will come through." Donald wiped away a tear forming in the corner of his eye. "Son, I believe you're right. No matter what." "Sure, Dad. As long as we're together, it'll be all right. Now, let's give this old truck a try." Donald leaned into the cab's open window and turned the ignition. True to Matthew's words, the truck roared to life. Donald was sure it had never sounded so good. The engine hummed and purred like a kitten. It was a lovely sound. Matthew was still looking into the engine and making some final adjustments. He was so focused on the carburetor he failed to see the swing of the axe above him as his father brought it down into his son's skull. Blood hit the fan blade and spun it everywhere. Matthew's arm slid into the working mechanism of the truck's engine, rending flesh from bone and from his hands, then his arms, as the mechanism sucked him into the running engine compartment. Little pieces of singed flesh and spurts of blood painted the walls and the floor of the barn. Donald walked back to the workbench, coated in a fine mist of blood. He took a shop cloth cut from unserviceable clothes and wiped the blood from his hands and the axe. His father was right. There was really no substitute for a good axe. Before leaving the barn, Donald reached in the cab and shut off the engine. Although it had sputtered when Matthew had gotten caught in the workings, it resumed its perfect pitch hum. Boy, that kid has a way with engines. Closing the door to the barn, he looked up at the lights burning in the house in the distance. An old home, it was hand-built by his grandfather to replace a structure on the same place. It needed a few minor cosmetic repairs, but the house was still solid. Donald wiped away the blood from the axe, admiring its beautiful sheen in the light of the full moon. The blade practically glowed. The back door of the house led to a small mud room. He remembered having to make Matthew and Robbie take off their clothes in this room one summer day when they both decided to play in the muddy pond. Sneaking the boys into the house to save them from their mother's wrath, he failed miserably. They both grew up to be such good young men. They were lucky to have them. He kicked off his boots, watching one of them stand upright and the other one flop lazily onto its side. The younger brother, Robbie, did homework on a small card table they set up when he needed extra room for his books. Donald heard the occasional noise from papers turning in a book and the scraping of pencil lead against loose-leaf notebook paper. Robbie was 16, the spitting image of his mother and a brilliant kid. "Matthew?" Robbie called from the living room. "Nope, Dad." Matthew is still out in the barn. Robbie, engrossed in his textbook, didn't notice Donald approach from behind. The boy was such a studious learner. Not much for athletics. The math was so hard, Donald didn't even understand any of it. This kid had an amazing talent for numbers. Maybe his son would, one day, work for the bank, repossessing their neighbors' farms. Deep in his mind, a voice of his younger days pleaded with him to stop. It insisted he didn't have to go through with this final act, and everything wasn't as bad as it could be. Another voice, wiser and more clear, commanded him to continue. The bank brought this on all of them. Or maybe the world did. Once a noble profession, the world of farming had turned upside down. It used to be simple. Raise crops, take them to the grain elevator, weigh them, and then someone gave you money. These days you were likely to have protesters outside your front gate threatening your family if you so much as hint at using fertilizers. The older, wiser voice was right. This had to end. Anger took over Donald as he thought more and more about the situation he was in. The loud voice in his head was joined by another and then another until hundreds drowned out the other voices telling him to put the axe down. Voices chanted over and over again, "Do it! Kill them! Kill them all!" There was no way those assholes from the bank were going to take their home away from him. After the home was gone, the boys would be gone too. Who the hell were they to tell him that he had to live the rest of his life on a Social Security check from 1 month to the next? It wasn't the bank's fault the boys were going away. Neither Robbie or Matthew wanted to be farmers. It was clear. The banks had co-opted his family and deciding with them. They were the real problems. Those blue-suited bastards behind their mahogany desks. Now they turned Donald's own family against him. Robbie turned to Donald like he was going to ask him a question. Donald swung the axe like a Louisville slugger and split Robbie's neck and the base of his skull open with stunning ferocity, partially severing the boy's head, the look of sudden panic and shock instantly frozen on Robbie's face. A short squeaking sound came from his lips as he tried to form his last words. His body slumped over and then crashed to the floor. "Robbie, honey, what was all that?" The voice from Mrs. Anderson called from upstairs. "Sorry, honey. I just knocked over the card table. Robbie is with his brother." After a few moments of silence, she said, "Well, okay, you're coming to bed?" "Yes, honey. I need a shower first." Marilyn Anderson was born Marilyn Chase. She was from Iowa. The eldest of 3 daughters, she grew up to be the perfect farmer's wife. She took care of the home, the child rearing, and even the financial books for the farm. Without her, Donald thought, there would be no Anderson farm. Setting the axe down on the bathroom floor next to the sink, he turned on the water and splashed some on his face. He would need to take a shower, but he wanted to kiss his wife goodnight before he did that. If he waited, she'd be asleep before he was ready to come to bed. He took off his clothes and left them in a pile, cleaning himself up in the sink. The water quickly stained crimson. Looking similar to wine, bloody circles dripped into the sink, its color looking calming, soothing. The blood formed a coagulated ring around the extent of the water in the sink, which would have to be cleaned up in the morning. That's the trouble with washing your face. You may be clean, but there's always dirt left in the sink for someone else to find. There was a flash of recognition in the mirror. What had he done? Did he really just kill his 2 children? No, he'd kept them together for all eternity. They were supposed to be together, always supposed to be together, he thought. That is the way it was supposed to be. It was the bank. They tried to tear them apart. There was no way he could let that happen. She insisted it be that way. It was the way she demanded it. He picked up the axe and stepped into their bedroom. Marilyn had always been a voracious reader. Tonight she read the latest book from the library. It was by an author he'd never heard of. But she was the smart one, not him. On the front cover it looked like a field of canola in bloom, its yellow flowers seemingly bending in the wind, making it look like a sea of yellow waves. Another one of those romance novels, probably set on a farm somewhere. She loved them. Donald held the axe and watched her for a moment. She was beautiful, even at this age. There was something about her that made her so desirable he couldn't help but feel he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. Marilyn looked over the top of her book at him, and for a moment their eyes met. Donald registered only a flash of understanding in her eyes of what was happening as he brought the blade down with a ferocious stroke. The blade shattered her sternum, sinking deeply into her chest, tearing her heart into pieces. The light immediately went out of her eyes. Leaning the axe against the wall, he went to take a shower, maybe to wash all the dirt and grime off himself, or maybe to wash off the pain and suffering those assholes at the bank had brought on his family. Perhaps it was possible this pain would never go away. The water felt cleansing. The soap and shampoo smelled wonderful. He took an extra long shower to try and soothe his aching bones. It would be better this way. Farming was rough on him, and the last few seasons had been extra hard. 2 seasons ago, he was almost killed when the tractor threw a belt while he was repairing it. Maybe getting out of the business wasn't such a bad thing. Towel drying himself, he walked back into their bedroom. His wife's blood had soaked through the mattress and bedding. The pages of the book, still in her hands, soaked up the sticky liquid, and the paper now turned deep red in color. Picking up the axe, he took it into the bathroom and used a wet towel to clean it off. Then, drying it carefully, he made his way downstairs. The axe really belonged in the garage, but time grew short, and he would have to be content with leaving it in the basement till someone returned it to where it belonged. Re-entering the bedroom, he reached under his side of the bed. It was there that he kept the only loaded firearm in the house. For years, he always had a loaded 12-gauge at the ready in case he needed it in the middle of the night. Thinking back, he realized he'd only needed it twice, both times for wild dogs. Laying down in the bed, he reached over and turned his wife's head towards him. Blood soaked through the bed sheets and wicked up the pillow to surround her head like a halo. He wiped a smudge of blood away from her cheek. Her blank eyes stared back at him. He gently closed her eyelids. She was beautiful, an angel who had chosen to stop at his house to rest one evening and stayed with him for the rest of his life. "I love you so much," Donald said. He placed the end of the shotgun against the fleshy part of his chin and looked at his wife one last time. With a sigh he uttered, "And now we'll all be together. Blessed be the tide that binds. What God has put together, let no one tear asunder." Outside the house, the springtime song of insects hummed along with the slight breeze in the air. Somewhere in the distance, frogs croaked out a melody to prospective mates. The tranquil night scene was interrupted with a sudden thunderous boom, which shook the house, and then there was only silence. I hope you enjoyed the first chapter of Crimson Tassels. I will be posting another few chapters in the coming week or two for you to hear. Again, if you are interested in this novel, you can pick it up at Amazon. You can find it by searching in the links below to my name. And if you are interested in supporting me on Patreon, I also post short stories there. So you can go check out some of my short stories. For $1 a month, you can support me and get access to the short stories. For $5 a month, not only will you get the short stories, but you will also get every new book that I write that comes out. as soon as it's bound, I will stick it in the mail and you'll receive that copy personally signed out to you. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.